First frost takes names. If you're listening in bed, get comfortable, because where we're going, warmth is counted like coins. The winter of 1347 arrives without fanfare, a thin white rind on the village pond, and a hardness to the air that cracks lips and shortens sentences. On the morning the frost first holds and doesn't let go, Hugh wakes to the sound of rope sliding over wood. His father, Osric, is already at the door bar, easing it up slow to keep the cold from rushing in like a thief. The hut is a small universe. Woven wattle walls smeared with daub, a low thatch that breathes snowflakes into the gloom, a fire hearth boxed by stones the color of old knuckles. 6 bodies sleep and wake in it. Hugh, his mother Elfwin, his little sister Mab tucked between them, Grandam Tilda wrapped like a cocoon, and 2 brothers pressed along the outside edge where cold hunts first. Nobody stretches in winter. Mind the sheets, Osric murmurs. Not linen sheets, sheets of ice along the door seam, grown inward in the night. They crack and snow dust the floor when he moves the bar. The air that squeezes through has a taste, iron, pine, and the promise of pain. Hugh hates that taste. He swings his legs down onto hard earth and feels the shock of it go up his bones. He pulls his wool tunic closer. Wool scratches, yes, but scratches mean living. Cotton kills in winter. They don't have any, not that he's heard of. He reaches for his boots where they've sat too near the wall and stiffened. He hugs each one against his chest until the leather yields. Small victories. Smoke's wrong, Aelfwin says, eyes on the roof. She means the way it drifts flat, unwilling to lift, a sign of clagged air and creeping weather. She's all ready. Moving bowls onto the table, not to serve food yet, but to count them. A ritual as old as the family. Bowls for mouths, bowls for days, bowls for measuring out a winter without lying to yourself. Each bowl has a notch cut in its rim. Aelfwin touches notches like beads on a rosary. We plan, she says, and no one argues. Planning is warmth you can't see but you can feel when a night stretches too long. The village bell, a rough iron pot swung in the green by a loop of rope, clanks once. Not for mass, not yet. For frost watch muster. The night watcher, Rainer, will hand off. 4 houses marked, Osric guesses. 2 for certain. Old Hodge, who cheats sleep and sleep cheats him back, and Nella, whose daughter is sickly. Hugh, Osric says, with me. Hugh nods. And that nod is an oath. You go. You do. You don't make a speech about it. Outside, winter is not a postcard. It's a specialist in edges. The pond is a black mirror under lace. The lanes are rutted and slick, where yesterday's thaw betrayed today's freeze. The oaks hunch like old men in shirts too thin. Each cottage exhales a different breath. Wood smoke blue, peat smoke brown, dung smoke sweet and sour. The manor sits on the rise, 3 chimneys standing like fingers pointing at God. Its smoke is fat and assured. Theirs is careful. Rainer meets, them with the frost stick, a hazel wand charred at one end for marking doors. 4 black smears stain the other end. Fire died at Hodge's. He swore he was resting. Rainer's voice is smaller and cold. Nella's boy coughed blood. I set a lantern by her coals. Matty Weaver's roof sags. And he doesn't finish the 4th. He just shows. They go to the 4th door first, because that is the way a village moves, toward its hurt. The door belongs to Emma of the Brook, who talks to cats and never misses a feast day hymn. It is stuck from the inside, frost welded to wood. Osric leans his shoulder, and the door grieves open with a creak that sounds like a crack in a person. Emma is in bed. She is very still. The air tells all. Too clean, too thin. No smoke. No sour from yesterday's pottage. Cold has a smell when it wins. Elfwin arrives behind them with a wrapped brick from the hearth. Mab on her hip under a shawl that is half holes and all love. She doesn't wail. No one does. They move like people who have been taught by winter what shouting costs. Elfwin lays the brick by Emma's hands anyway, as if heat has ears and might change its mind, then pulls the wool up to the old woman's chin. We'll keep her until ground softens, she says to no one, to everyone. The corpse shed by the east hedge will take her later. The earth is armor now. Even graves have to wait their turn. They leave Emma with a lamp and a crossing of fingers. On the green, Elder Berengar stands on a woodblock with his staff. He looks like a weathered fence post dressed for church. Around him, the village gathers without gathering, clumps of family, arms folded tight to keep heat in and hope from leaking out. The rules are not written anywhere, but everyone knows them because their bodies taught them. Move slow. Spend. No breath on what you can nod. Share bad news before it becomes worse news. Eat the story you don't want to hear early in the day so there's daylight left to swallow it. Frost has its teeth in us, Berengar says. So we shorten our days. 2 fires for all, no more. We cook by lots. Households 1 through 6 today, 7 through 12 tomorrow. The pit will be opened for inspection at noon. The pit, a clay-lined hole by the old ash tree where surplus grain was laid, layer by cautionary layer after harvest. Not to feast, to survive. Any rot we cut away, any extra we measure with God as witness. The villagers murmur, a sound like bees too cold to fly. Hugh's stomach answers with a lonely growl. He can tell what he will eat tonight by who is standing which way, by the slope of shoulders near him. The Hart family face inward, their brows tight. Their pig died last week when it found a latch with its clever nose, wandered to the pond, and misread the ice. Widow Hart's eyes went, "To Gray in a day. She's here because people who stay home in winter die a little faster. Roof," someone shouts, and heads snap up. Mattie Weaver's low thatch is bowed as if kneeling. There is a drip-drip from its hips, then a slow rumble like a cough, then a shift. The weight of last night's wet snow is doing math. Snow plus thaw plus refreeze equals collapse. Hugh and Osric run without deciding to. Bodies choose, minds keep up. They reach the cottage in 4 breaths. Matty is already bracing an inside beam with his back, red-faced and grunting something between a prayer and a curse. His wife has 2 children under a table the size of luck. Osric shoulders the door, takes in the leaning king post, and says one word. Rope. Hugh is already gone, then back with a coil stolen from the sledge by the green. Osric loops and hitches like a man who learned knots from a river, not a book. He throws the rope over the main beam, ties it to a roof spar, and shouts to the men. Outside, "Pull smart, not strong." They pull. The beam shifts. Snow slides in a long white tongue and hits the ground with the sound of 100 tiny betrayals. A child under the table squeals, which shouldn't be allowed and somehow saves the moment. Matty sags, then laughs that laugh people make when a blade misses by a hair. "Ale in spring," he promises the air. Promises are a currency that winter, accepts and makes you pay later. "Spare 2 bundles from the steward's shed," Elder Berengar calls, seeing the break from the green. "Permission, rare and real. The steward will count it. He counts everything. But a roof in winter is not a nicety. It is a door between breath and none." 2 men jog toward the manor's wood store to bargain beams from the Lord's winter tally. There is a rule about joy. You don't hold it in your hands too long. As they reset the brace, a moan travels the lane. Hodge, who cheats sleep, did not cheat cold. Neighbors stand at his door with caps in hand. Berengar closes his eyes a beat. He turns to Father Edwin, who has appeared like a candle lighting itself. The priest nods. He knows the rites the way he knows where the floor creaks. "In the nave. Eat early," Elfwin tells Hugh quietly, as if she's reading his bones. We'll need you for the pit. The pit is not a place that welcomes many feet, but today a careful procession forms, each person leaving the warmth of their own hearth to invest in a fire they'll never see but will feel later. The clay cap peels back with a crackle. Breath. Steams and hands go steady. The smell that rises is the most important smell in the world. Clean grain. A thin thread of sour snakes through from one corner. Elfwin points. We cut. Don't argue with rot. They don't. They lift sacks like saints and pass them hand to hand, each weight a wager against February. Grain slides in measured ribbons, into tally bowls, Berengar's staff knocking rhythm on the beam for the count. The light already thinks about leaving. No one wastes time wanting more day. You get what you get. You make it serve. At dusk, Hugh stands at the communal fire with a rabbit he snared where the hedgerow touches the brook black. The meat is thin and stubborn. The smell of it makes his teeth water. He hands it to Mab as if to a queen. Don't chew fast, he warns, half teasing, whole serious. She rolls her eyes, a miracle of girlhood that winter hasn't stolen, and nods. Berengar speaks over the pot, voice a little louder now that flames do the shouting for them. Emma of the Brook will lie in honor 3 nights, he says. Her cloth will be woven when the thaw allows. Hodge will join her. We are fewer by 2 and fed by 2. The old woman's stores will be counted into the village math. The dead feed the living. No one says the words cruel. They sit in the same bowl with necessary, and then, because humans are stubborn in hope, they cut a heel of bread saved for this exact moment and pass it round. Not a feast, a muscle memory. For the first frost, Maddie says, voice shaking now that his roof stands. For roofs that hold. Laughter shakes shoulders like a blanket. When Hugh crawls into bed that night, the wind has a new voice at the shutter. Less bite, more hiss. Like a cat glaring through a crack. He turns to face Mab's warm back and lets his breath find hers. The two of them a small furnace against. A universe that wants to balance every book. He sleeps hard until, of course, the watch hour wakes him. Winter divides its nights like bread. First sleep, watch, second sleep. The middle is where the village lives its secret life. Up, Osric whispers. Not like an order, like a candle passed hand to hand. Hugh stands into the dark that smells of ash and wool and close-held lives. The fire is a red eye under ash. He cups a coal, feeds it a whisper of straw, and watches it choose to live. The sound it makes, a soft, hoarse yes, is the only music winter permits. The door's bar is cold under his palm. He lifts it slow and steps into a night that isn't empty at all. Somewhere a fox barks. Somewhere a woman hums while she mends. Somewhere a man coughs and measures his breaths against the time left to dawn. Hugh thinks of the pit, of the rope, of Emma, of the bread, of the way Berengar's staff found the count without looking. He thinks without words. We will make it if we make it together. The frost breathes back in his face, and he breathes anyway. The hour between sleeps. If you're awake at 2 a.m., you're in the right time. This is when medieval winter opens its ledgers and decides who owes and who is owed. The watch hour inside a wattle and daub house is a ritual without candles or bells. Movements are choreographed by survival and superstition both, the two braided, like rope so tightly you cannot say where one ends. Aelfwin, already upright with a shawl about her hair, sets her spindle to its quiet orbit. Wool twines into thread with a dry whisper, the same sound a field makes in August when grain rubs. Grain. Grandam Tilda, who keeps the family's bones on straight tracks with stories, rubs warming stones along Mab's feet and mutters at Frost as if it were a rude neighbor. You'll not have this one, mind. Osric crouches by the banked fire and shapes its tomorrow with a stick. He uses no more wood than he must. Men like him live by 2 arithmetic tables, one for the Lord and one for the hearth. The hearth table is the harder. Bowl count, Aelfwin says. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't have to. The family forms a quiet circle on stools with bottoms polished by 20 winters. Each holds a bowl. Each bowl holds a pinch of oats and a pinch of hope. Aelfwin's finger moves bowl to bowl, counting days, not mouths. 17 at proper ration. 24 if we thin. She makes eye contact with Osric across the glow. The space between their eyes is where the decision lives. He nods once. Thin, he says. Not because he is cruel. Because tomorrow we'll ask him to carry wood and rope and argue with ice, and thin or not, tomorrow comes. Tilda clears her throat. That throat has called lambs, scolded thieves, sung Advent in keys no choir would bless. Tell them about the cutters, she says, to Osric. He blinks. She means the team who goes to the marsh when grain runs tight, to cut cattail root and pound it to starch, to sieve it and dry it by the fire, to pretend it is flour when desperate days brand their names across the sky. Not yet, Osric says. We're not cutters yet. We'll be, Tilda says, not unkind. Better to teach the hand what shape the handle takes before the tool is needed. So Hugh learns the cutter's steps by the watchfire, how to stamp through ice, to find crown shoots, how to feel with the heel of your hand for root that has the starch weight, how to slit a root long ways and fan it like a book so the mud lets go. He learns how long to soak and how long to pound and when to stop, when the paste stops lying and tells you it will behave like bread even if it will never taste like mercy. He files these away in the place he keeps knots and tracks and the exact scuff sound the oxen yoke makes when it's fitted true. Winter, more than school or church, makes men. Outside, the night says snow. Not to eyes, there is almost no light, but to skin, that particular hush that falls over hedges when the air is heavier than it was, the sound of distance coming closer. Osric has a trick for listening to weather. He rests a flat palm on the shutter and waits for how cold climbs into it. Tonight the cold climbs slow. That means a thick fall and a morning that makes short men look taller in lanes narrowed by drift. There's tapping at the door. A double tap. The code for neighbor, not danger. Hugh lifts the bar. Wat the tanner stoops in, bringing leather smell and a swath of night with him. His beard is glazed with frost as if winter tried to make a candied fruit of him. He holds a bundle wrapped in old sacking. For your boots, he grunts and sets the bundle down. A pair of nail shoes, leather soles studded with iron. Crampons, a man in a different century might say. Here they are, a gift heavy as a favor and light as a life saved. You'll have them back when the thaw comes, Aelfwin says, which is code for we will not be indebted beyond the season. Wat shrugs. Return them when you've crossed the pond without drowning, he says. Jokes are allowed in the watch hour if they travel with use. Any word at Hodges? Osric asks. Wat's eyes move once. That is a scent and a funeral, all at once. Father Edwin will say the words after noon. Then, after a beat, the steward came down to count the manor pigs himself. He's afraid of what the villagers will ask when grain edges the pit. He grins without mirth. He can count by candle. We count by hunger. That math wins. They share small beer, warm enough to argue with cold. Hugh sips and thinks of the steward's soft hands. He has never seen them blister. He wonders idly what a blister on a steward's hand would look like. He suspects it would declare a holiday. When Wat leaves, Tilda seizes the hinge of the moment and swings it to where it must go. Story? Mab asks, expecting a shepherd with a clever tongue or a saint with iron bones. Tilda chooses one older than saints and slyer than shepherds. Once, she says, eyes on the fire's eye, the frost husband married a summer girl. He built her a house of icicles and hung her a wedding necklace of rime. She smiled and said it was fine, but she kept a coal in her pocket, wrapped in lamb's wool. Each night she whispered to it. Not prayers exactly, names. Names of things that promised to come. Rain, mud, worms, nettles, eggs. The coal listened. It grew a breath. The necklace dripped. The icicles sang. The frost husband said, "You will be the ruin of my house." She said, "No, beloved, I will be its spring." Mab sighs. Hugh, who thinks himself too old for such sugar, hides how the story warms him in a place behind his ribs where even cold can't find it. Their watch is interrupted by a rap on the shutter. One rap, repeated. Code for urgency. Osric is up. Hugh is behind him. On the step stands Berengar himself, snow-dusting his cap. "Rayner's gone to Martin's," he says. "The baby's coughing like a blacksmith." Osric nods. No one asks why a frost watcher is a midwife in crisis. In winter, jobs breed extra heads. "We'll bring stones," Elfwin says, already swaddling two from under the ash with rags and soaking them with faint heat. Hugh's skin prickles as the door opens onto a lane already half vanished under new snow. The world has shrunk to lantern spheres, and the sound of men making their feet go steady. At Martin's, the air in the cottage is tight with panic and soot. Martin's wife, Eleanor, holds the baby upright, a boy the size of a loaf. His little. Chest seesaws. Breath barks like a fox. Tilda is immediately a general. Steam, now. They put a pot on and throw in what herbs they own that smell like hope, thyme, fennel, dried mint saved for sore bellies. The smell climbs, spicy and strong. Elfwin holds the child gently over the steam, counting heartbeats. Not too hot, not too long. She thumps his back with the soft of her hand, and something loosens, the way drift loosens when you cut it right. The infant gulps more air than cough. The men breathe like they've been underwater. "Thank you," Martin says in a voice that is all scrape. "We'll owe. You'll pay by staying alive," Tilda says. "Cheapest debt in winter. Don't be rude and die before it's honored." They leave lantern glow for a night that has grown a throat. It swallows sound. Hugh follows Osric's boot marks, nail shoes biting, and thinks of how the village is 1,000 thin cords knotted around every person's middle. When one wavers, the rest draw tight. Not because they are kind by nature. Some are. Some are not. Because cord is cheaper than coffin. Back home, the fire eye is drowsing. They wake it enough to see seconds sleep toward them like a slow cart. Hugh lies down, tunic still on, cap tugged to his brow. As the house's breath sinks to sleeping, he stays awake 1 minute longer to make a vow to no one. A winter vow. "I will keep the lantern," he thinks. "I will be the one who wakes." In summer, you vow to gods. In winter, you vow to tasks. Dawn borrows from gray and pays back with wind. When the door opens, drift has avalanched it thigh-high. The first job is shovels. Not because anyone loves a shovel, but because no one eats if the shovels are idle. The wood of the handles sings cold into Hugh's palms. He and his brothers work in a rhythm learned from fathers who learned from theirs. Scoop, lift, toss. Scoop, lift, toss. They cut lanes not to be tidy, but to reach the things that keep lives attached. Well, sty, stacked wood, and old Matilda's, who is too old for drifts bigger than she is. A shout breaks the scrape pattern. "Mind the pond!" It's Will Carter from the green, panting. "Hart's boy is on the ice!" No one sighs. No one says, of course. They just run. The pond is a white sheet framed by brown reeds and black willow fingers. On it, a small figure in a brown cap stands in the wrong place, on the part that holds over the part that doesn't. He's testing it with a stick, a boy's brave stupidity. Hugh hears one sound he will never forget, the low, wet groan of ice asking how much it can bear and deciding it is done, then a crack like a promise breaking. The boy drops. By the time Hugh and Osric reach the edge, two men are already prone, on the ice, distributing weight like foxes do, sliding on their bellies toward the hole. Osric throws the rope they use for hauling sledges. It lands a foot short. He looks at Hugh and does not say what he's thinking because if he says it, the cold might hear and approve. Hugh lies down. The ice under him sounds like a harp out, of tune. He wriggles, elbows and knees cold and wet, and slides the rope the last foot. The boy's cap floats up, then the boy's pale face, eyes big as moon. Osric hauls. The belly's on ice haul. The rope holds. The boy is a fish caught back. By land, when they drag him on to the bank, he coughs a river. His mother is there without having been seen to arrive. She rubs his skin the way frightened animals lick their young clean of terror. Osric stands. The wind has knifed color out of his legs, where his hose are wet. He doesn't notice. He ties knots with hands that look like roots. He looks at Hugh once, and that once says more than winter allows you to say aloud. Hugh feels bigger and smaller at once. 2 logs for the fire at Hart's tonight, Berengar calls, arriving like he had been thrown by the bell. And my cloak for the boy. We'll make meat tomorrow from my share. There is no embarrassment in this public generosity. It is not charity. It is math. The day proceeds as winter days do, with tasks that are a moving target, and meals that are an apology and a mercy at once. At noon, Father Edwin speaks for Hodge. He says the words as if, God is hard of hearing and will need them repeated in spring. Emma of the Brook lies in the corpse shed, with a sprig of dried rosemary at her breast, because Elfwin insists the dead deserve good smells, even if their noses don't work. At dusk, Hugh's arms feel like each bone has its own heart. He eats pottage with cattail paste for the first time this winter. It tastes like what it is, labor disguised as bread. He doesn't hate it, he doesn't love it, he respects it. Respect is enough. Night arrives early, the way winter insists. The watch will come again. Hugh will rise, the rope will coil and uncoil, the pit will be counted like a psalm. Somewhere a baby will cough and be held over steam that smells like fennel. Somewhere the steward will count pigs and feel clever. Somewhere the river will test its ice and remember being water. Somewhere an old woman will hold a warming stone and tell Frost that it can have her hands but not her stories. If you're still listening, breathe once for the bellies on ice. They do not think of heroism. They think of knots. Hunger Moon Mathematics. By the 6th week, hunger stops being a noise and becomes a number. They call it the hunger moon when the nights are longest in the marrow and the body's ledger is written in small script you feel in the knees. Hugh feels it in his belt, which he has punched to a new hole with an awl that used to be for leather. Elfwin feels it when she licks her thumb after kneading, and there is no taste on it, only the memory of taste. Osric feels it when he lifts, a log that used to be bend and is now strain. On the morning Berengar orders the pit reopened, the village stands close without pretending otherwise. Father Edwin is there not because God owns grain, but because men fear theft less when a priest watches. The clay seal comes away in flakes like old paint. The scent that rises is good, dry, clean, and then the sour note again, sharper this time, like a rumor that has found an ear. A rat got in, or a damp moved through, or a patch turned on them in the night. It doesn't matter why. Winter doesn't accept why as payment. We cut what's bad, Berengar says. We cut deep, rot lies. Elfwin nods. She has cut. Gangrene from meat and knows rot's talent for looking shy while it eats your future from the edges. They cut. 1/3 of one layer goes out to the pigs. Not a waste, a reroute. The pigs convert error into spring bacon. They know their place in the economy of grace. Ration 2/3, Berengar announces after the count. Bodies are lights. We turn the wick down. No one cheers. Cheering is expensive, but someone exhales as if that were a kind of clapping. After the pit, the council meets in a circle scratched with a stick in the frost. Circles mean no one stands higher, even if everyone knows who stands heavier. The items are the same every winter and always new because winter is never the same river twice. Who has surplus firewood, who needs oil for a cough, who can trade labor for tallow, and what to do about Willem Brewer's habit of watering ale beyond the accepted rules of sin. He's stretched it thin as a saint's patience, Watt says. There's a ripple, a winter laugh, small and honest. In summer, they would bellow. In winter, you laugh like you're holding a candle. Then the cutters are named Osric, Watt, Helena of the Marsh, who used to be of the manor, until a steward's son learned what no meant only when he heard it from Steele. She knows water and where it hides food. And Hugh, though Berengar's eyes ask Osric before his mouth does. Osric nods once. He's a rope I can pull. They go with poles, baskets, and a silence that means concentration, not gloom. The frozen marsh opens under their heels with a treachery that is honest. Ice that is thin says so if you listen. Helena shows Hugh where to stamp and where to slide. Think like a bird, she says, not like a cow. They reach the place where brown reeds stick up like old men's hair. Under the black skin of water are roots fat as fists. Hugh breaks through with his pole, and the shock of cold grabs his shins and holds on like a creditor. He yelps. Helena grins. You'll yelp once, she says. Then you'll learn. The work is a liturgy of mud, cut root. Fan it open with thumb and knife until it looks like a book teaching you to read its starch. Pound it with a short beat rhythm against a board until fibers give up and paste admits its paste. Soak, strain. Spread near fire on a rush mat until it dries into something that will behave in a pan if you speak to it nicely and don't ask for miracles. Hugh's hands go numb, then burn, then settle into that winter state between pain and pride. They carry home what they've made as if it were gold, and in this season, it is. Eilifwin cooks it into pottage with a bone that has already given its first generosity to yesterday's pot. The cattail's starch pulls the broth thicker and teases the tongue into believing. This saves lives, Osric says to Hugh, and Hugh hears what is not said. This is not a feast. He eats and does not ask for joy to attend. He asks only for the bowl to be empty, and then a slow warmth to move out from his middle like a song too shy to perform in public. That afternoon, a stranger arrives. Not a banner over the lane. Just a man in a cloak with the look of travel and a jaw that has chewed on too many laters. He stands at the green with his hands open to show no weapon and waits to be seen. Winter visitors are a crisis or an opportunity, and the two wear the same coat. I come from Wolfham, he says when Berengar steps near. They had rain at harvest. Mold took their barley. We traded down the valley until the valley was a bone. I walk to see if there is work I can do that earns food I can carry back without shaming my house. His name, he says when asked, is Oswin. He does not give a father's name, which is a kind of truth and a kind of wound. Berengar looks him over like a carpenter looks over a board that might be a shelf or a trap door. What do you do? He asks. Turn earth and fix things, Oswin says. I can find water with a willow wand. My wife says I mend pots with my eyes. That draws a crack of winter laughter. Men who boast are despised. Men who make light of their boasts are watched. Helena says, if he can find water when the well sours, he's worth 2 mouths. In winter, praise is currency heavier than coin. Berengar nods. You will sleep in the church, he says. You will work tomorrow with the ditchers. We pay in food and in one small promise. If you steal, we will not kill you. We will walk. You barefoot to the hill at night, and you can ask the wind to eat you slow. His tone is not for drama. It is a policy statement. Oswin's mouth twitches to prove he understands. Hugh watches him with a boy's complicated mind. He makes two piles of thoughts. One says danger, the other says mirror. Winter shows you yourself in other people's hunger. The mirror is cruel and fair. At Vespers, Father Edwin prays longer than usual. He prays for the dead and the nearly. He prays for lords with soft hands to remember the peasants whose hard hands make their bread. He prays for the return of birds and for the breaking of ice without drowning anyone he can name. He is careful in how he talks to God in winter. He reminds God of specific faces. He knows that in hunger, the mind turns to arithmetic with heaven. And if he does not name names, someone will stop coming to listen. After the prayer, the women gather in Elfwin's hut for mending. They bring their eyes and needles and gossip in baskets. Winter gossip is not summer gossip. It is an information network with barbs. Edith says, "Her cow's milk tastes like onions," says Maud, without malice. That means someone is stealing leeks or the cow has found the kitchen patch under a weak fence. Either way, nutrition is moving without permission. Helena saw otter print by the brook, Elfwin offers. That means otter, which means fish, which might mean bone broth for children if the men remember how to set a weir that works in half-thaw. The women sort these notations into action or prayer, with efficiency born of being the ones who keep human. Engines running. They shred nothing, waste nothing. Old hose become thumb patches become doll cloaks become lamp wicks become light you can read hunger by. Bark? Maud asks quietly as the thread whispers. No one says yes. No one says no. When bark flour becomes necessary, the word carries a weight that makes the tongue slow. Finally, Elfwin nods. Tomorrow, she says, Osric will take the ash tree's thanks. Hugh learns bark with his knife. You don't take the outer skin. That's the tree's armor. You take the inner, the cambium, pale, and almost pretending. To be generous. You slice it into ribbons and dry it and crush it with a stone. It tastes like a story about bread told by a man who has never met bread. But it keeps mussels from eating themselves. That is not poetry. That is engineering. Oswin works like a man trying to make the future believe in him. He digs a drainage slit from the east field to the brook with Watt, and by noon water is already choosing to leave where it used to loiter and rot. You can make earth go where you wish, Watt says, impressed against his will. Oswin shrugs. Earth listens if you speak the right way. Helena, passing, snorts. Teach that to the Lord. The steward appears on the third day of the hunger moon. He rides, of course. He wears a cloak thick as a mattress. He carries a tally staff, which he taps against doorposts, as if the wood will whisper how much meat hangs inside. He asks sensible, questions with a tone that makes them cruel. How much grain remains? How many sick? How many dead? How many days until seed must be protected from being eaten? The Lord reminds you, he says, that his seed takes priority. The phrase hangs, indecent and exact. Aelfwin keeps her face still by force. Tell the Lord we hold his seed with our lives, she says. Tell him if we starve, his seed will be sown by ghosts. The steward laughs like a man who thinks he is making friends and writes something on wax. He grants permission for deadfall collection from the South Wood for 2 days. Villagers do not cheer. They go. Permission is not a ribbon. It is a window that will close. Osric and Hugh shoulder sledges. Hugh keeps his eyes down and his ears open. Men talk more in the wood. They speak weather and oxen and also fear. The pond took a sheep at Hatter's. One says. The river is talking under the ice at night, another says. It says its true name, and it's not floor. On the second evening, a wolf passes the hedge line where the lane narrows. He is lean. He is mathematics with fur. He looks at Hugh the way Winter does, not with malice, with assessment. Hugh stares back until the wolf decides neither of them is worth the error of approach. The animal ghosts into the black like a thought you choose not to finish. Hugh's heart goes off like a rabbit's and then settles into a human rhythm. He tells no one. He files the wolf beside the rope and the cutters and the boy under the ice. That night, they open the family chest and count, not treasure. Rags, pins, bits of tin saved for the day tin saves a life. Salt where salt still shines, a little jar of goose fat with a story tied to it in string. 3 more weeks, Aelfwin says, if the snowdrops are honest. Grandam Tilda snorts. Snowdrops are the only honest white in winter, she says. Hugh thinks of the churchyard's south wall where the ground breaks a rule and green shows its thoughts first. He wants to run there and beg the buds to hurry. He does not. Rushing? Plants is like rushing old women. It earns you a backhand. They keep the feast of St. Matthias with extra candles and an onion sliced so thin it's almost theology. Father Edwin speaks of seed that falls into the ground and dies and then becomes more than it was. Everyone hears seed and thinks of the steward. Everyone hears more than it was and thinks of their bellies. The prayer is a bridge. It holds. On the way home, Oswin walks beside Hugh. Your father makes choices like a man who doesn't hate himself in the morning, he says. Hugh blinks at the odd blessing. Oswin glances at the manor and then at the church and then at the sky. Not many men get to choose what they are in winter, he says. Most are chosen. Your father goes first when someone shouts. That is a kind of wealth. Hugh doesn't know what to do with this, so he stores it where he keeps Tilda's. Stories and the knife that stays sharp. That night, the watch hour carries a new sound, faint, far, but real. A crack, a groan, a long, low ripping like cloth torn by a giant hand. Osric sits up. The river, he says. His mouth is calm. His eyes are not. The breaking of ice is not a drum roll for spring. It is a hazard that eats the unwary. We'll go at dawn, he says. We'll set watchers. We'll mark the week. Hugh nods. He makes a small fist under the blanket where no one sees. It is not a fist of anger. It is a fist of choice. He will be a rope. The hunger moon gives nothing for free, but it gives back something if you do not stop asking. The proof that human arithmetic can outlast winter's math when the numbers are written together. You count bowls. You count steps to the well. You count heartbeats over steam. You count knots on a rescue line. And at the end, when you are too tired to count, you look at the faces around your fire and see more than yesterday. Fewer than last year. Enough if luck and stubbornness stay married. Sleep comes like a vote you cast for tomorrow. The watch will come again. You will rise to meet it. Somewhere snowdrops push through cold earth with their little white flags of surrender. Winter's, not yours. When the river says its name. If you're listening in the hour the city is quiet, lay your palm flat against the wall. Feel for a faint, steady murmur. In a medieval village, that murmur is the river under ice, rehearsing its true voice. At first light, the watchers go out. Osric, Raynor, Wat, Helena of the Marsh, and you, poles. Over shoulders, ropes coiled, a stubborn calm in your bellies that isn't hunger for once. Winter has taught everyone new alphabets, and the rivers is the hardest. Grayness in the east that means brittle ice, a low cloth-ripping sound that means an upstream pane has broken, a line of steam that means water runs free beneath a lid. That only pretends to be floor. Oswin from Wolfham is already at the bend where elm roots hook like old hands. He carries a willow wand the way a priest carries a psalter, not because it is magic, but because it reminds his fingers what they know. He dips it and watches the tip quiver over a dark seam under the snow. There, he says. When she breaks, she'll break here and rush against the footbridge. If that pile's ice, the water will seek a low path. His eyes go past you to the village center, to the ash tree and the clay-capped grain pit beyond. He doesn't say the words. He doesn't need to. A drowned pit is a winter's work turned to paste. Relief channel, Helena says, already jabbing her pole into the softest piece of bank. In summer, she belonged to the manor orchard and knew the names of pears by their freckles. In winter, she belongs to water and knows how to make it believe you. We open her a new mouth before she decides for us. You and Watt hack at frozen. Soil with the flat backs of spades warmed above the hearth at dawn to stave off shattering. The smell is shocking. Earth, real earth, damp and iron sweet, and so alive it's indecent. You taste it on your tongue, and it tastes like a promise winter can't veto. Osric drives in 2 stakes. You weave a crude hurdle from fresh-cut hazel that Reeves would fine you for in summer. Today, the steward's tally staff can snap in half. For all you care. Gabion, Helena says, teaching without pausing. Fill it with stones and brush. Slow the first rush. Give her friction. She means the river, which will slam fists through the new mouth you're digging like a drunk, at a door. She means winter, which loves to take one disaster and bounce it into 3. Rayner squints upstream. She's restless, he says. The sound starts as a rumor, then a complaint, then, there it is, a long, ripping groan that travels through bank and bone. The main sheet parts 100 paces above the bend. A grate, slate slides, noses down, and shatters on the shoulder below the footbridge. The bridge shoulders it off, once, twice, and then stutters. You feel the jolt under your knees. "Haul!" Osric barks, and the word has the dignity of a prayer. The hurdle goes in crooked, but it goes, and stones thud into its belly. Brush follows, armful after armful of last summer's hedge clipping, a remembered warmth becoming present help. Water takes the hint. It hammers the gabion, sucks in brush, and then does the arithmetic Helena wants. A path here is easier than fighting there. The new mouth coughs black water into the old mill race and across the field margin you shaved lower last autumn. For luck, Osric said then, pretending to be careless. Luck, like rope, is best made in advance. The footbridge sags, but holds. Ice floes slide past like sullen cattle forced into a corral they didn't choose. On the far bank, neighbors from the next ville raise torches in the pattern your elders agreed on after the great flood of your grandfather's time. Long, low, long, then too short. We see it. We're safe. Hold. Rayner answers with your villages. Torches. Long, long, then a slow circle that means channel opened. Father Edwin stands on the green with an armful of smudged rushlights and a blank-faced calm he learned at the bedsides of the dying and now lends to the living. A shout at the bridge, Matty Weaver, trying to kick loose a snag of ice with a pole too short, leans too far and drops like a stone straight into black. It happens exactly the way the worst things do. Quick, ugly, and precise. He doesn't scream. He surfaces once and his mouth opens, astonished at the world for containing something so cold. "Rope!" someone yells. And you're already on. Your belly sliding across ice thin as an argument, Osric behind you, rope around his middle, the other end around a stump. It's your body's work to be brave, Osric's to be careful. You skid to the edge and swing the loop. Maddie's fingers are purple and slick. The first throw hits his shoulder and glances, the second loops his elbow, the third, there, a catch. At his wrist, like a wedding ring. Osric's voice goes flat. Hold. The men on the bank lean, then pull, then lean again when the ice moans. The rope decides to act like a rope and not a story about rope. Matty comes up, and with him a sheet of ice the size of a door. It slides under your chest and lifts you. You sound like a frog when you hit the bank. It isn't dignified, and it doesn't have to be. Matty coughs water like a drowning mill. Helena is there with rags warmed under her cloak, wrapping his arms. His feet, his argument with frost. Back to heat, Osric says, pointing with his chin at old Matilda's. Closest fire. Most hands. A pair of men carry Matty like a rolled rug, not unkindly. Father Edwin peels off, takes two boys by their collars who were inching toward the sugared edge like flies to milk, and points their noses home. "We don't barter boys for bridges," he says, mild as a butcher blessing a knife. The river keeps saying its name, not roaring, that will come later, but talking in a tone of voice the village only hears twice a year. You listen. You adjust the hurdles. You pack more brush. Oswin uses his willow to check if your new mouth tries to scuttle sideways. "Stake the right bank," he says, "or she'll undercut and take the ash with her." You and Watt drive. Stakes with mallets that jar your elbows all the way to imagination. Raynor ties a rag on a long hazel to flag the worst of the thin ice, so children who forget will be reminded by cloth if not by memory. By noon, the channel holds. The footbridge sways like an old drunk walking, but its legs remember how. The manners. Reeve arrives on a foam-lipped horse, sees your brushwork, opens his mouth for scorn, and closes it when he sees Lord Cuthbert's mill boys nodding to your handiwork as if to a senior craftsman. "The Lord will hear of this," the Reeve says. Tone halfway between threat and acknowledgement. Helena smiles with all her teeth. "Make sure he hears the river's part, too. We would hate him to think we could teach water to kneel." Raynor leaves two men on watch at the bend, then sets the day's patrol pattern like a dance. Upstream, to listen. Downstream to warn, across the footbridge only with the rope lifeline tied to the waist, no exceptions and no, "just this once." He assigns you to the bend with Oswin. "He'll show you the river's grammar," he says, and walks away before you can be embarrassed by the metaphor. Oswin squats and sketches his favorite subject into mud with a stick. A bend, a choking, a new mouth. "Water wants to go," he says. "If you give it a pleasure road, it will choose it. If you give it a wall, it will hunt for a crack. Men are the same. If you want a man to do a hard thing, you must show him where it is least. Impossible. You want to laugh at the pomp of it, and you also feel the weight of a sentence that might just be the map for getting from this winter to all the others in your life. By dusk, the village is still standing, and that counts as celebration. But celebration in Hunger Moon is a candle you shield with both hands. Elfwin adds 1 finger of lard to the pottage. It turns the broth from gray to almost amber, and you could weep from the richness. Grandam Tilda holds the warming stone to her ribs and tells a river story that isn't about water at all. A girl who married a man who was mostly ice and taught him how to listen to thaw. That night, during the watch, the river's voice swells, and then softens like a singer leaving a hall. The new channel gurgles, talkative, almost cheerful. Raynor's torch code flashes twice more to the far bank. They answer, steady as breathing. Osric rolls the rope that saved Matty and sets it by the door bar where the family keeps what it trusts most. Water gourd, tinder, knife, the good spindle. In this house, rope sits among sacraments. When you close your eyes finally for second sleep, cold is no longer a predator crouched at the hearth. It is a neighbor whose house you kept from burning and who will perhaps nod when you pass tomorrow. The river keeps speaking. For once, you do not argue. Eyes at the hedge, if your house has ever creaked after midnight and made you sit up without knowing why, you already know the feeling that came to the hedge that week. Being watched by something that wants what you want and will take it with fewer manners. Tracks first. Not dog. Longer stride, deeper toe. The prints stitched the snow along the thorn, like someone writing their name in a hand that had never seen a school. Watt, the tanner, saw them at dawn bringing back his frames. "Wolf," he said without embroidery. He said it the way you say rain or rent. Wolves belong to winter, the way apples belong to late summer, predictable as saints' days and a little holier in their hunger. No one panics. Panic eats calories faster than fear. You do the ordinary, extraordinary things. Check the sheep hurdles, double the gate latch on the sty, pull the goats' tether stakes and move them to the center yard where sound carries better. And men move quicker. Grandam Tilda's hands stay busy, but her mouth loosens. When I was a girl, she says, which is how every story worth telling begins, the pack of 12 came down from the high wood. They took a calf at Hatter's, then tried our pigs. We turned the track with a stinking trail of rendered fat, lit in pots, and a path of guts that led where the deer run. Wolves are not devils. They are accountants with teeth. They'll take an easier sum if you show it to them. Devils would be simpler, Elfwin mutters, but she's already rummaging. For the pot's too cracked for cooking and perfect for fire. You help Watt pack them with pine knots and tallow scraps from candles that died clean. The smell slides up your nose and settles behind your eyes. It's supposed to, Watt says. That's what fear is made of in a wolf. Same as us. Rainer walks the lane at dusk with a bag of iron spikes and the quiet of men who took winter's pledge early in life. He nails the swingle tree to the half-broken cart by the north stile. The cart that always looks like it could be useful and never is. Tonight, it is a false door with a snare behind it. He strings netting low across the goat path so that if a wolf trots where it trotted last year, it will learn humility and maybe death. We don't hunt them, he says to you, ticking off each task on the ledger of his fingers. We make their word for here mean no. When the first eyes appear, they are lower than you expect. A wolf never puts its face where a spear expects to find it. They slide along the hedge line like spilled brandy light, 1, 2, 3, then more. Glow reflected from the village fire lanterns moving on their slow patrol. Watt whispers numbers. 4, 6, 8, and then stops. Counting wolves out loud feels like you're naming children you won't feed. A goat bleats in Widow Hart's yard. Every head turns, the wolves included. The sound is a bell tolling for stupidity. Widow Hart's latch has a trick to it. Everyone knows it, including the wolves now. Osric is there in 3 long strides. Hands on wood, body against door, voice low. Hold, Hester. That's not the goat's name, it's Widow Hart's, and men say a woman's name in winter to bring her back to work from the place fear sends her. You are behind him with a brand stolen from the hearth and smelling like sap and smoke. Helena is at the corner, already lighting a fire pot with a strip of grease-soaked rag. Ready to swing, she says, as if she's calling changes at a dance. The wolves test. They do not charge. They don't need to. They walk parallel to fence and fire, reading your line for errors. The biggest, male by the chest, winter knows no chivalry, picks the place where the hedge thins near the midden. He lowers his head and flicks his ears. Here, 3 younger wolves ripple forward. Now, Rainer says, and the fire pots arc. They don't land on the wolves. They land between wolves and gate, shattering into stink and flame. Wolves are braver than you, smarter than you, more honest in hunger than you, but they hate surprises as much as men do. The trio wheel, 1, slipping on the glazed snow and howling, pain, fear, wounded pride. The big male checks and looks right into you. The look is not hate, it is adjudication. He slides backward into dark, not like a coward, like a strategist revising a plan that no longer balances. Gate, gate, Elfwin hisses, and you can hear your mother's breath the way you hear a bow's string when it is 2 heartbeats from failure. Widow Hart's fingers find the latch's old trick at last. The goat's bleat changes from panic to insult. The men move as a braid. One lifts, one shoves, one sets the crossbar, one wedges a post, one smears pitch along the hinge cracks to keep scent from telling the wrong story. A fox, oblivious to theater and policy, makes a fool's dash for the chicken creel in the confusion. He hits Rainer's low net and flips forward onto his face. For a whiplash second, the wolves register opportunity, small meat easy, and flow 2 paces that way. Rainer's staff thuds the ground and a brand flares inches above their muzzles. They recoil, not from the pain, but from the insult. That memory will talk to their legs the next time your hedge line glows. You don't shout at the retreat. Men who shout at wolves are telling the night they are nervous. Instead, you breathe and set another pot, and another. Osric ties a strip of salted offal to a hazel wand and hands it over the hurdle at the far corner where the deer trail leads to the coppice. He drags it slow, low, no drama, only scent. The wolves' heads turn in unison. Accountants. Easier. Some. 2 peel away first, then a third, then the big male, flowing after the suggestion you wrote for him with grease. Grandam Tilda doesn't clap or sigh. She spits into her palm and rubs her knees. "Don't grow proud," she mutters. Hungry, comes back. In the morning, you find prints on the deer path, neat as slate marks, and 2 patches of churned snow where lesser minds than yours tangled with the brambles you planted in the fall, with wattles bent low and dirt mounded high so winter would not see their use until it was necessary. You find the fox, too, neck clean broken in the net, not your intention and not a loss. His fur will line 2 small pairs of mittens when tanned with dishwater and ash, a miracle from a mistake. Hester the goat looks offended by the entire night, and gives 3 cups more milk than usual in compensation for having been made a fool. Elfwin laughs into her scarf where no one sees. By noon, rumor outruns you to the manor. The reeve rides down, not because he cares for your children's fingers, but because wolves taste lordlings too if they ride stupid. He counts pots, sneers at your grease, then stares a half-second too long at the clever low net. "That's poacher's work," he says, cautious as a man stepping on ice. Rainer doesn't blink. "It's ours," he says, which is either a confession or a charter, depending on who's writing the book. You spend the afternoon smearing more pitch along the hedge's leeward face, whistling through your teeth to keep your fingers fast. Watt sets jaw traps along the far hedgerow where the pack might test next. Father Edwin brings 2 bells from the altar that have cracked and hangs them on a stave as a clapperboard. "God bless them as bells," he says. He won't mind if the blessing leaves by a different door. At dusk, wolves pour again from the line of alders like a thought the forest has been trying to make all day. They check your gates. The awful path earns a glance and a lip lick. Then one hears something beyond and tilts its head. Hammers at the far field, men's voices not pretending to be birds. The ditchers have reached the place where the river channel you opened meets the old mill race. Wolves, like water, choose easiest sums. They slide away, not far, not forever, but away. Treaties signed for one night by stink and light and the arithmetic of risk. And that is the village's genius in winter, not to kill every danger. That is a summer story. But to draw a thin chalk line on ice and make predators, weather, even hunger, step back from it a hand's width long enough for your children to sleep. When you carry the fire pot home at last, its stink deep in your hair, Mab reaches for you with a face that has grown sharper in the last month and says, "Did they come?" You say the only true thing a person can say in winter that doesn't. Cost extra, we are here. She nods like a queen approving an oath. The fire sighs with the warmth of one additional log. Outside, the hedge watches the night that watched it, and the wolves, honest thieves, move toward deer that run where men cannot. The steward's ledger, the village's rope. If you've ever had a boss who brings a spreadsheet to a funeral, you know a medieval steward. He returns the week after the river opening, wrapped in cloak and certainty, tally staff polished like a lie. This time, he doesn't come alone. Lord Cuthbert rides behind him on a gray gelding with a black-belled saddle, and a face that looks like someone taught a plowshare to disapprove. Men at arms flank him, breath steaming like dray horses, hands on spears for warmth more than war. It is not usual for a lord to show himself in Hunger Moon. That he's here means rumor has done what rumor does, grown teeth and whispers, and reached ears that hear only when the sound carries titles. Father Edwin meets them at the church door, sleeves red from hauling brush, eyes patient as wood. He bows low enough to keep custom intact and shallow enough to keep dignity unbruised. "My lord," he says, "our river broke. Your footbridge holds because these hands worked. You will want to see." Cuthbert angles his gelding toward the bend, gold spurs chiming, the reeve's scowl jangling even louder. When he sees the hurdle, the brush-packed gabions, the flagged dangers, his face does a complicated thing. Admiration, wrapped in annoyance, the expression of a man who dislikes being helped but knows precisely when he has been. "You built that?" he asks. Not to Father Edwin, priests mend souls, not rivers, but to the cluster of mud-faced peasants who don't know whether to doff caps with hands full of useful dirt. "Helena of the Marsh set the plan," Rayner says. "Oswin marked the flow. Osric staked." He does not say your name because he is a genius of politics. A boy can be praised in public for saving a man. He should not be praised for touching the Lord's bridge. You feel the heat of pride touch. Your ears, anyway, and pretend it is windburn. The reeve tries on contempt. "A hedge witch and a wanderer," he says like a child spitting gruel. "The Lord's river is not a thing to be—" Cuthbert cuts him off with a finger that probably cost 3 inches of taxes from a hamlet you've never seen. "The Lord's river," he says, "is a thing that drowns seed if men do not teach." It manners. "I like my seed dry." He turns to Helena. "Woman, speak it to me as if I were a tired ox." Helena smiles without permission. "We cut her a side mouth," she says. "We packed her jaw with brush so she chews slow. We flagged the thin. When spring is full, we'll re-wattle the eroded bank. If your men throw in fresh ledge rock at the foot, the bridge will keep through thaw." She does not curtsy. She does not preach. She treats him like a man with a task who has coin enough to buy stone and sense enough to spend it. Cuthbert grunts. "Stone we have," he says. "Men we have. Sense." He glances at the reeve. "When I borrow it." The men-at-arms cough to conceal a laugh they will pay for tonight with extra stable duty. The Lord looks past Helena to Oswin. "You, wan man, your face says villain, your hands say ditcher. Where did you come from?" "Wolfham," Oswin says, and in that one word is a full confession of hunger, flood, and the indignity of needing other men's bread. "I'm here to work for food and not steal." Cuthbert's gaze shifts to the village. Small fires, patched thatch, bodies with angles where curves should be. He is not a stupid man. "Steward," he says, the way he might say, "dog, how much grain remains in the pit?" The steward flips his wax tablet, counts notches, subtracts from a number that exists only in his head. "Enough for 14 days at regular ration," he says. "More if they thin. Seed grain for your lordship's fields is sealed in the manor loft, untouched." His voice drips safety for the manor and nothing for the village. "Untouched," Elfwin says from the back of the crowd, the words snapping in the cold. The reeve turns to snarl at her insolence and sees a woman who has measured out meals with a knife for 6 weeks and is not in the mood for geometry. He swallows. They bring them out of the corpse shed, where winter kept them neat as bundles. Emma of the Brook, Hodge who cheated sleep, a child from Wolfham who came already coughing and stopped 3 nights later in the hush before prime, and 2 you never met because the village is larger in winter than you think. Distant cousins drawn by rumor of your pit's discipline who arrived thin and were made thinner before being made quiet. Each is wrapped in their best cloth, which is to say their cleanest. Each has a sprig of something green in the wrapping, if a house had anything left green to give. Rosemary dried to dust, a strand of ivy, pine needles that smell like a distant fest. Snowdrops poke through near the church's south wall. Small white bells raised by hands who planted bulbs there 5 winters ago exactly for this service on some year like this one. Father Edwin's Latin is steady. He speaks of seeds falling into ground and becoming more than they were. Everyone, hearing it, knows the priest would trade all his Latin for one more sack in the pit. But words can be bread when bread can't. He is generous with them. Elder Berengar reads names as if names have weight. He gives each skill back to their owner for the last time. Emma, herb keeper and cat whisperer; Hodge, fence mender, who taught 3 boys to set a post that doesn't heave; child Alice, who laughed when the snow fell through the thatch and tried to catch it in a bowl. He pauses. We are fewer, he says, not to make anyone cry, but to satisfy the rule that sorrow must be named, or it sets up house in your bones and refuses rent. The men dig, 3 on, 3 off, because even thawed, ground is still half stone and men are thinner than they should be. Osric lifts with his legs, not the pride in his shoulders. Winter punishes pride by breaking it. Watt sets the board lengthwise across the soft edge, so no one sinks past his boots. He learned that trick from a grave that tried to keep him when he was 15, and thinks of that day now with a private shudder and a gratitude that feels like heat. You carry spades back and forth like a man training to be trusted and learn a new sound, the clack of stones nudged against the coffin boards to tuck them in. After, the women press the snowdrops into the thaw-soft mounds, fingers careful, movements precise like mending. Elfwin takes the last of the clean tallow and rubs it into the cracked skin on a child's hand who is still among the living. Waste? Someone whispers, not unkindly. No, Elfwin says. Insurance. At the end, no feast. There is only bark bread shared thin and a swallow of ale poured onto each mound. So they can smell our table, Tilda says when she sees your look. So they will be content and leave our pantry alone. It is affection and superstition and the precise engineering of grief that peasant theology performs when Latin leaves. Gaps. After burial comes the other thaw, tempers, plans, talk. People stand in longer clumps than the cold usually allows. The guild men appear again on the lane, more humble than last time. The weavers have work to fill, but not enough wool to fill it. And they have heard that your sheep wintered better than Wolfham's on account of ditch work and the South Meadows windbreak. They offer grain in advance against wool to be shorn when St. John's smiles, their clerk says, meaning June, and Alfwin negotiates like she's trading swords. Half measure now, she says. Half measure at Johannes when you take fleece. The clerk and Elder Berengar glance. It's not customary for a woman to bargain at the green with a guild. Custom is what winter makes room for. The clerk agrees, as if he thought of it. By evening, the village holds new weights, grain heavier than it was, grief lighter for having been lifted and laid down proper. Bark bread is still supper, but in the pot near it simmer nettle tips and a fist of sorrel Helena found near the coppice under the brown leaves, and the smell is so loud it makes the hut's walls sneak closer. Green, Mab says, awe and promise in one syllable. The first bite has the sting of nettle and the acid of sorrel and the memory of summers that turned nettles into soup and boys into men without killing them. That night in the watch, the house breathes easier. Not slow, not careless, but easier. Osric brings out the harness and oils the driest strap with a last scrape from the goose-fat pot, rubbing life into leather the way Elfwin rubbed it into the child's hands. We'll plow, he says. Not tomorrow exactly, not next week exactly, but soon enough that the word sits like a coal in the middle of the family and throws a small, stubborn light. Rayner sticks his head in the door without ceremony and says, Rooks are mending their nests. Elfwin smiles into her shawl. Rooks know, she says, echo of a line you've heard since you could walk. Sleep takes you hard, the honest kind earned by new holes in a belt and old knots in a rope and the act of putting people back in ground that now remembers it is supposed to receive. Winter is not done, but it is different. It has been made to do a thing it hates, give. Outside, the wolves read the air and decide against meat that sings prayers. They move to the high wood where deer have no Latin. The river talks in its new mouth. The causeway grows by brush bundles and the echo of men's hammers. And under the church's south wall, small white flowers say what men don't need to. Thank you and keep going at the same time. First furrow. First storm. If your bones have ever itched to do work that makes the next month easier, you already know the morning of first plowing. It doesn't begin with trumpet or cockcrow. It starts with leather. Osric flexes the main yoke strap, works oil into the cracks, and hums the two-note hum he only makes when handling tools that can kill a man kindly if neglected. Outside, the yard mud is a different animal than winter's. Less knife, more glove. It takes your boot and gives it back, and in the exchange there is the first fair trade you've felt since Martin's baby coughed in the lamplight. At the north field, the oxen stand in their winter coats, long hair, slow eyes, bodies that say, "We survived," in the grammar of ribs and breath. They smell like work and old hay. Osric sets the yoke. Heavy ash thwarts across the necks, the bow pins sliding home with that particular wooden cluck that makes your palm ache with wanting to be older. Rayner inspects the iron share, polished by sand and attention, not by vanity. "Cut shallow first," he says. "Let the ground remember it is ground." Elder Berengar speaks before the first cut. He doesn't sermonize the earth. He doesn't need to. He says two things that might be the same thing. God keep the blade straight, and mind the wet corner by the ash. She sulks. Father, Edwin nods and frowns at the sky simultaneously, which is how priests ensure responsibility spreads across heaven and weather both. The first furrow is a moment each eye in the field holds, the way Osric leans, the way you put your weight into the stilts just enough, the way the oxen test the breast strap and remember how to lean against a demand that isn't winter. The share bites, the moldboard kisses earth and flips it like a blanket turned down, and the smell that rises is so intimate you look away from it. Soil unveils itself, dark, blunt sweet, worm flicker, last year's straw coming up like yellow hair through a barber's brush. Everyone watches the first straight. If the first is true, the rest will fall in love with it. You ride the line as if balancing on a thought. Osric's finger pressure on the left stilt corrects what he doesn't say aloud and you don't hear with ears. The furrow opens behind like a seam you will return through later with seed and prayer. You make 3 passes, shallow, letting the field remember breath before asking it to sing. The line of children who've been sent to walk the furrows and pluck stones begins to chatter like starlings, the first cheerful noise that isn't desperate you've heard since Epiphany. Edric is among them, thinner but brighter, showing Mab a snail that pretended to be a stone and lost. She pops it in, her basket like treasure. Widow Heart walks with them slower than before but present. Grief walks too, but it keeps to the ditch today. By noon, a pattern emerges. Furrows that could be music if they weren't work, men loosening coats enough to make elbows actual joints again, women bringing bread and small beer and a sprig of wild garlic that found a sun trap by the fallen oak. Elfwin sets the bread on a board, and the smell of garlic sits on it like laughter you can eat. Oswin talks quietly with Helena over a crude map he scratched with a charred stick, where the ditch should be cut deeper to keep the future crop's feet dry, where the causeway must be raised half a hand more. He is polite about it. She is not. That's why it will last. Then the rooks give the first warning. They rise from the elm knoll like gossip with black feathers. Wind change, Rayner says, eyes toward the western skirt of sky where gray doesn't sit. It leans. Weather leans when it intends to arrive, with luggage. The priest crosses himself without moving his lips. Berengar tightens his scarf like a man cinching up an opinion. The men look at the causeway as if looking can make it taller. 2 more passes, Osric says. Then stow the plows. We don't prove bravery to a storm. By the 5th furrow, the wind is a letter opener sliding under your collar. By the 7th, Grit stings your eyes, and your oxen's tails stand sideways. The sky does a trick you don't admire. It darkens without thickening, like a bruise, and then the rain is on you in sheets. Not a spring blessing, a test. Cold water slaps hot backs, and every man in the field makes the same face and does the same three things. Throws a sack over the iron to blunt the rust, angles the plow under a hedge so wind will not use it as a kite, and turns animals toward home. You are a rope team without rope, and it works. Each boy paired to a man, each man matched to an ox, each ox trusting hands that smell like iron and old bread. Widow Hart staggers once. Helena takes her elbow and drags her with a courtesy she usually saves for water. Children run, but along the path, you tell them, not across the field like summer fools. The first cart reaches the causeway and hesitates. The water has risen. Yes, and found the ditch you cut last week, yes, and is crowding along it like merchants at fair, rude, loud, eager to buy ground and carry it away. But the brush bundle heart you laid and the stone shell the Lord's quarry yielded do the thing you made them do. They refuse. Water finds its tax elsewhere. You step on the new-built rise and feel the smartest sensation you've felt this year. Human insistence that has been accepted by mud. Oswin grins without showing teeth. Told you, he says to nobody and Helena, which is the same person. Rayner plants a stave at the lowest spot, marks it with his knife. 2 hands below worry, he says, for this storm at least. At the bend, the river tries to remember the flat sheets it wore 2 weeks ago and finds hurdles and flags and a new mouth that has learned to talk back. It slams anyway and sulks anyway, and at last chooses its road, which is a grown-up thing you are startled to see water do. The footbridge complains, the footbridge survives, one ice floe, orphaned and resentful, bangs the downstream brace, Watt swears. You throw 2 more brush bundles into the Gabian's hungry side, and the bundle noses down into the brown froth and decides not to return. Your hands shake after and you call it rain. The storm passes like a mood. No apology, no eye. Contact! In its wake, the field shines dark as a raven's back. The causeway drips. The rooks resettle, offended and resuming their repairs in the same motion. Father Edwin walks the length of the raised road and pats the top with his palm, as if blessing, a child who refused to die. It will keep, he says, and because he has no authority over ditches, his blessing might matter. Back in the yard, your oxen stand blowing steam and judgment. You rub their necks with dry straw and speak the old lies the livestock trained you to tell. There now, that was nothing. Aelfwin brings a basin to sluice mud from your hands and throws the water at the sty so the pig can think this was all for her. Mab brings you a slice of bark bread as if it were cake. It is not cake. It is still honest effort, but now, somehow, it tastes less like last resort and more like collateral for a future meal. Nettles and oats in a week. Something green chopped. On top, a rumor of eggs, because the hens have started whispering in the corner of the yard where the sun sits longest. At watch, while the roof ticks down from rain and the dog dreams of being useful, Osric lays the field map on the table and smears the charcoal lines with a finger, fattening them where water scared him, thinning them where the soil bore weight. We plow the higher strip tomorrow, he says, and leave the ash corner 2 days. He gives you the charcoal and holds his breath. Mark it, he says. You do. Your hand shakes because you are cold, not because he asked you to do a man's job with a child's bone-thin wrist. Grandam Tilda warms her hands over the flame and says, to the world or the door bar, or the mouse that lives behind the bread chest, I have seen storms knock men out of their own names. She looks at you instead of Osric. You kept yours. You pretend you are interested in the map so she can wipe at her eye with the back of her hand and call it smoke. Sleep is heavy and clean and full of mud-colored dreams. In them, you push the plow and it pushes you back and the two of you agree. foreheads pressed to behave. The storm is a bark in your ear instead of a bite. The causeway is a back you can stand on. The river speaks, and you speak back in brush and stake and rope. The oxen hum. The rooks approve. You wake into a morning that smells like wet dirt and bread and something you almost don't recognize until Mab says the word like a spell, egg. One, small and warm, in the nest box. You cut it into 6 and no one complains about fractions. The first furrow is behind you. The first storm is behind it. Ahead is a field that will remember you when it grows and a road that will carry carts over mud without taking boys with them. Winter has not left. It has simply agreed to negotiate. The long exhale. If you've ever had a bill paid and only realized afterward how tightly you'd been holding your shoulders for months, you already know the first exhale of a medieval spring. It doesn't shout. It reaches into tasks that felt like punishment yesterday and puts a hand on their back. The hens stop whispering and start boasting. Eggs click against wooden bowls like quiet applause. Nettle tips sprout in south ditches, and the old women descend with baskets and humor, pinching young leaves with fingers tougher than most men's pride. Wild garlic writes its white exclamation points in the coppice shade. Sorrel hides under last year's bracken and announces itself with lemon on the tongue. The pottage changes color by degrees until steam from the pot smells not only of survival, but of appetite. The plows roll every day now in a rhythm that looks like prayer from the hill. Furrows line up like soldiers who have decided not to die this year. Men's faces stay hard because staying hard is what keeps you in front of the blade, not under it. But laughter lives closer to the surface. You hear it in the way Watt swears at a stone that has been in the same spot for 40 winters and decided to rise today just to test his patience. You hear it in the argument between 2 oxen who long wintered together and don't like the reintroduction of teamwork. You hear it in Elfwin's permission for Mab to run to the churchyard without a shawl at noon and come back with a fist of snowdrops for the living. The dead had theirs. The guild men keep their word. They arrive with carts creaking not only with grain, but with a part of town that smells of soap and hot iron, new pins, carding combs with a few good teeth, a skein of dyed thread that makes Mab's eyes go wide as a bread trench. The clerk counts carefully and fairly because Father Edwin watches like a hawk, and Lord Cuthbert showed his face last week, and the story ran down valley faster than a fox. This village moved a river. Guilds respect competence the way priests respect silence. They market and price accordingly. Elfwin brings out fleece from last year, graded in her mind the way other people keep letters, fine from the backs of ewes who never lay in muck, coarser belly wool spun for rope or sack. She doesn't let the clerk touch with rings on. He smiles and removes them. He has met this sort of woman before and learned the law. If she can feed everyone with 3 onions and a prayer, don't test her about wool. They agree on a measure that tastes like justice. Grain moves to your side of the ledger. Fleece and promise moves to his. When he goes, he bows to Elfwin because he will be back. The causeway dries enough that carts roll without prayer. Oswin trains 2 boys from Wolfham who came with him and stayed because not dying is an argument few parents win without help. He teaches them the language of ditch slope and how to read a puddle's accent. This one says, "Fill me with brush." This one says, "Dig me a tongue to the brook." He shows you the smallest difference between a good culvert and one that will drown the road in October while pretending to be your friend. He is still a guest, but his footprints now exist in places you will walk long after he decides whether to stay. Edric returns to Martin's hearth for good on a day that smells like bread on purpose. His eyes have changed. They are still large in a small face, but they don't look for permission from hunger anymore. He carries a small carving Osric showed him how to finish. A bird, not a fancy one, with a slit in its back where a twig can rest so it nods. Yes, yes, yes. He sets it on Martin's shelf like a man laying a brick in a wall. Martin puts his hand on his son's head in a way that is almost nothing and means everything. "Good hands," Osric says when he comes home without the boy, and Elfwin nods, once. "Good hands," she agrees, leaving off the rest. "Good chances." Raynor stops you on the green with a question he has been pretending not to ask for a week. "Helena needs a second for water," he says, not a question though it is. And it is not quite a blessing though it sits that way in the chest. Not just ditch work, watching, reading, knowing when a puddle is a rumor and when it's a vote. He watches your face with the particular bleak amusement of a man who knows he is offering a life that is half mud and half argument, and thinks that is a fair split. Osric stands 3 paces away, pretending to puzzle a knot in a rope that doesn't require thought. You look at him. He looks at you. The small nod he gives is not ownership. It is release. Grandam Tilda learns at supper and snorts. "I should have known you'd choose a job with no clean shoes in it," she says. "The river will bring you bride gifts. She has bones in her, but she loves men who listen." She cackles at Elfwin's eye roll. "Don't worry, the river isn't a rival. She can't bake." In the watch, a new habit makes itself at home. Planning beyond tomorrow without betraying winter's covenant of humility. Osric draws lines on a board with a coal, where an extra shed would stand if barley proves itself at harvest, where the pig pen could be lengthened with the hazel cut that grew 2 fingers since the steward allowed coppicing, where a small orchard might begin with 2 grafted scions from the manor if the reeve remembers how you tied a knot on a gray gelding. Elfwin counters with realities. Lime for the walls if we extend, cloth for new door drafts, a second pair of mitts before next December because your fingers are not negotiators. You like this talk the way you like a true story told twice. The thaw, wolves come less, not because kindness grew in them, because deer became careless. You still smell them downwind on some nights, iron and musk and the math they do with noses. You keep the pots ready and the net low, and the goats know to lay their arguments down by night. The fox that broke his neck in the net became mitten, linings that made 2 children cry with joy the first morning they wore them and discovered the woodpile did not argue with their bones. Father Edwin calls a Thanksgiving that isn't yet a feast. He knows as well as anyone that praising God before the first harvest is like telling a story without an ending. But he also knows that people require punctuation. He brings out the good bell that rings true and invites each household to light a candle and say one thing they are grateful for that isn't food. There is awkward silence and shuffling. The peasant soul is shy in public. Then voices, "Rook song," says Widow Hart. "Bridge," says Mattie Weaver. And everyone laughs until someone claps him on the back and he coughs water in memory. "Hands," says Oswin, looking at them as if they were strangers who stayed. "Knots," says Osric, and Father Edwin, to his credit, does not flinch. "Eggs," Mab says, breaking the rule joyfully, and the whole church forgives her by general acclamation. "Snowdrops," Elfwin says, voice steady. Grandam Tilda holds up her warming stone, now cracked and surrendered to summer's shelf, and says, "Stubborn." Outside afterward, the clerk from the weavers stands with his ledger and his attempt at humility. "Our guildmaster offers a small thing," he says, and produces a comb with more good teeth than not. "For combing fleece, your prices were fair. Fair is rare. We thought to pay it back while we are in the mood." Elfwin takes the comb like a sword from a knight and doesn't put it down for a long time. She doesn't thank him twice. Gratitude is currency and must be spent carefully. You walk the new causeway at dusk with Raynor and Helena and the smell of wet grass that isn't ambition, just grass doing what it does. Raynor kneels and scratches a line in the clay at the culvert mouth. "If water runs higher than here in a summer storm," he says, "you'll need to clear the mouth. Thrown brush, cows' tails, children's mistakes. Don't wait until it's frothing. Helena shows you how to feel a ditch's sides with your bare feet in the dark. Sound tells lies. Toes tell truth. You learn the smallest difference between a gurgle that means free and one that means stopped. At home, Osric looks different when he sees you come through the door with mud to your knees and satisfaction behind your eyes. He does not ask if you made the right choice. He sets an extra wedge of bread by your bowl, which is the native dialect of paternal approval. Mab says she will marry either a man who speaks water or a man who speaks bees, whichever comes to ask first. Grandam Tilda declares bees are less jealous. Elfwin says bees don't move rivers. No one argues with the premise that you should be asked. And then, because life owes nobody a tidy chapter break, a small thing happens that tells you the exhale is real. You wake in the middle of the night for the watch and realize you were warm, enough not to notice being warm. The fire is not a dragon to be fed, it is a friend asked to mind the door. You open the shutter a finger, and the air that slides in is sharp but not adversarial. Somewhere beyond, a frog says something obscene to the stars. You grin into the dark and let the house breathe around you. Morning tastes like oats that were measured slightly more than yesterday, like nettles that sting then apologize, like an egg you didn't cut into 6 but into 5 because Mattie Weaver brought a fish from the footbridge as tribute to Knots. The long exhale continues. It will be interrupted by hail, by prices, by some lord's idea of justice. But for now, it is a rope slackening after a winter of pull. You pick up the stilt handles and the ditching spade, and the new job that is. Not quite a job, and feel your name settle around your shoulders the way a well-mended cloak does. An old shape, warmer now. The field waits, the road lifts, the river listens. The village counts bowls and notches and blessings without blushing. And you, who have been counting everything, let your shoulders drop half an inch and measure that. When the Lord walks the furrows, if you've ever cleaned every corner of a room you didn't own because the landlord said he might stop by, you already know the morning Lord Cuthbert rides after Easter. He comes with the same gray gelding whose leg you pulled back from, the river's mouth. The same reeve pretending not to be nervous, and fewer men-at-arms because news has traveled down valley that your bridge held. This is not a parade. This is an audit. Elder Harold, breath shorter this spring, stands with Elder Berengar and Father Edwin at the field edge. Harold raises a hand in greeting. Berengar holds the tall staff the village uses when words must travel further than lungs. "My lord," Father Edwin says, plain as bread. "You'll want to see where brush became path." Cuthbert looks older. Winter. Taxes, nobles, too. But the eye is the same, counting, weighing, looking for the place where praise and payment meet. He walks the causeway first, reins loose, head cocked like a man listening for a lie. The brush bundles you and Oswin, and the boys from Wolfham, packed under stone, have knitted into something that feels like decision underfoot. The ditches on either side still run brown from yesterday's shower, but they run. Water doesn't sulk on the road. That is the whole point. "Raised well," Cuthbert says at last, the words grudged and therefore precious. The reeve inhales, to make it his thought. Cuthbert talks over him. "I want 3 more hands' breadth before midsummer where the clay dips near the alder. Steward, put brush on the tally." The steward scratches a note with his stylus like a man shaving hair. He intends to count later. "And pay the ditchers with the grain promised," Cuthbert adds, as if he remembered himself and decided to be generous just this once. Father Edwin does not smile. Priests know when to bank a coal. Helena of the Marsh is already at the footbridge, a stave under her arm, mud to the knee as if manners were for dry ground. She doesn't wait to be called. She points her stave. "We want ledge rock here and here," she says, tapping where the current gnaws. "Your quarry can spare it. If you lay it wrong, water will take it and the bridge together, and we'll be back in the river shouting." She speaks to him as if he were a man with a job, which he is. The reeve opens his mouth to bridle. Cuthbert's gloved hand rises half an inch. Down, dog. "You'll mark it," Cuthbert says to Helena. "My men will lay it. If it fails, I'll have your name. If it holds, I'll remember it when fools tell me peasants can't think." He turns to you almost as an afterthought and not at all. "You, not boy," he says. He remembers small things in the way men who survive remember. "Walk me the fields." No title, but a summons is its own dignity. You lead him along the first furrows as if showing a guest the best plates you don't own. Osric and Raynor keep working because stopping for lords is a habit the village has loosened this spring. Work is not a show. Work is why anyone eats. Cuthbert squats by the first straight and takes soil in his hand. He is not a fool. He rubs it and looks at how it breaks. "Graceful," he says, meaning not pretty. "Right. You cut shallow first." It is a question without a question mark. "Yes, my lord," you say. "The field breathes before we make it sing." You do not talk about the song, but he hears it anyway. The man is not deaf. The steward clears his throat like a rooster who lost his hour. "Rent's due at Lammas, and Martinmas as custom," he announces to no one and everyone. "Corvée 3 days per man on manor plow team, 3 on hay, 3 on harvest, fines as posted." Men nod without nodding. It is the old arithmetic, writ tidy in a voice that has never cut turf in a sleet squall. Father Edwin steps in on cue, and as was agreed, he says, voice mild as a whetstone, "Grain advances to be repaid in brush and stone, which we have turned already into road." He gestures at your causeway with a palm like a blessing and a ledger line. The steward breathes through his nose. He does sums. He hates that the numbers are not all his. The guild clerk arrives before the lord departs, bold or foolish, but wearing humility like a cloak against weather. He bows properly, hat in hand. "Weavers." "Compliments," he says. "We find our looms idle, and your fleeces promised by St. John. We bring a comb to speed your carding, and a measure more grain upon marks to be satisfied when the sheep yield." Cuthbert's eyebrow lifts. The clerk turns slightly, so he addresses both lord and village. "We prefer our cloth free of famine," he explains. "Hungry carders make poor thread." Even the steward grunts here. Even his sums admit this. Elfwin steps from the line of women, shawl neat, hands clean from washing fleeces that are not yet shorn, because spring is a ladder you climb, rung by rung. She does not simper. "We'll take the comb," she says, "and the measure if the guild will send a man to show my girls how to mend tooth gaps without wasting fiber. If you want tight thread, help us teach tight hands." The clerk blinks. He knows a bargain when he hears one, especially from a woman who doesn't waste adjectives. "Done," he says. He produces a comb wrapped in cloth. It glints like possibility. Mab's eyes go round. Father Edwin writes a mark on his wax, and the clerk scratches another on his board, and the bargain is law in 2 hands and 1 bell. On. The green, after the lord has inspected the pig tally and the sty latches, and permitted 3 men to cut hazel poles from the lower bank, with Osric to mark the stools. Coppice, not cut. He mounts to go. He looks at you again. "Raynor, says you hear water?" he says. "Make sure you hear the reeve, too. He has a louder voice." A joke, almost. Raynor doesn't smile. He's thinking about the ditch above the north strip that likes to pretend it's a path. Cuthbert's party clicks off down the causeway, men-at-arms side-eyeing the culvert mouths like they might bite. The reeve rides behind, calculating exactly how much swagger he can wear now that the lord's back is turned and the village's road did not suck a horse to the shoulder. He settles on a lot. "Boundary beating," he snaps, as if he invented Rogation. 3 days hence. All boys come, all men walk. Fines for absentees. Raynor inclines his head. "All boys," he repeats. Then he looks at you with the tiniest grin. "Watermen, too. Work returns like a friend who stayed through a fight." The plows go back in. Women go back to bread that is more grain than bark, now that guild promises have become sacks. The causeway gets its extra brush. The footbridge. Braces are marked with a smear of chalk where ledge will lay. Oswin shows you how to read the tension in a brush bundle by the way it creaks when you press your knee into it. If it sings like that, it will hold. If it grates, it wants another armful. He's talking about road hearts, and you hear Father talk. You swivel and catch Osric watching you with a face that is a knot your hands could untie. That evening, after the men have eaten and the steward's distant horse clop is only memory, Aelfwin spreads a scrap of linen and sets the guild comb on it. Grandam Tilda tests the teeth with a finger and nods. When your grandmother came to this village, she says to no one and you, she had two things, a pot with a crack you couldn't see and a comb with 3 teeth. She made rope out of wool and will out of air. Aelfwin taps the comb. So, can we? You sit to the watch with the map and the coal and Rayner's stave leaning against the door bar like a promise. Rogation Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Father Edwin says, counting the days before Ascension. We'll beat the bounds and bless the ditches. If your ditch is proud, it will learn humility. He smiles into his sleeve. Osric raises an eyebrow. And if the boys forget the boundary oak, he says, we'll bump them against it until they don't. Grandam Tilda cackles. Bruises make memory where words fail. You sleep hard and wake to a village that remembers itself in public. Boys with willow wands, men with staves, Father Edwin with his book, Elder Harold with his breath, Elder Berengar with the staff, Aelfwin with a basket because food is liturgy. The Lord's visit has left more than footprints. It left a shape in your mind, a field that breathes, a road that keeps its promise, a river that takes instruction, a ledger that runs both ways. And you, whose hands have learned knots that do, not slip in ditches that do not drown, feel a new weight at your belt, Rayner's spare whistle on a leather thong. If water misbehaves while I'm counting heads, he says, you shout into this. The river listens for it. So do I. You put it to your mouth and blow once. The sound is thin and shrill and cuts the morning like a stake through turf. The oxen lift their heads. The men grin. The reeve glares. Helena nods once, the way a woman nods to a boy who is no longer exactly a boy. The Lord has walked the furrows. He has praised and priced. He has ordered and allowed. When he rides away, the village does the work that will make his orders look wise and his allowances look generous, and it does the work that will not be counted on any wax, the kind that sits in wrists and ropes and the way a boy watches water and learns to ask it to step aside. Hunger Gap's last bite, Rogation and smoke against frost. If you've ever had a debt almost paid and then watched the last coin roll under. A cupboard, you already know the Hunger Gap's last bite. Spring is here. Green speaks. Eggs argue for every bowl. But the old pit holds only dust and duty now, and the new grain is weeks from milk. Men stop looking thin and start looking like themselves again, only to discover themselves still tired. That's how the gap works. It pretends to be over while asking for one more week of sense. Rogation comes like a rope thrown across those days. Father Edwin leads the village beating the bounds, not because God forgets where your fields end, but because children do, and men, and lords, if you let them. You go with Rayner's stave and whistle, Osric with his not-quiet hands, Helena with a pocket full of chalk, Aelfwin with bread because nobody blesses on an empty stomach, Elder Harold with breath and Elder Berengar with the staff and the remembering. You walk the outermost hedges, the elms that mark the corner, the old stone at the lane that has sat there since your great-grandmother's grandmother. At each mark, the boys are bumped, gently with laughter and a firm hand, against tree or rock, the bruise a lesson that will not unlearn itself. Father Edwin reads a psalm in Latin. Then Harold says the same thing in village. This is ours if we work it and keep it and pay fairly from it. That is theirs if they do the same. If anyone steals by hedge or word, may he eat nettles without beer. The boys snicker. The men don't. At the brook boundary, Helena drops chalk lines on stones like a mason. Water will try to write its own boundary, she says, as if scolding a toddler. We remind it. Raynor notes where the bank slumped in last week's storm. Brush there, he tells you. Not now, when we have a minute. You tuck the thought behind your ear. Your ear is a good pocket this spring. The reeve turns up at boundary 3, pretends to lead, smacks his staff against the oak as if it will make him bigger. Father Edwin smiles politely and reads his blessings around him. Men do the essential thing, ignore what doesn't help. When the procession reaches the North Strip, where water lingers in a way that makes mildew feel invited, you blow the whistle twice. It slices cloud and chatter both. The line stops. Listen. You don't mean your voice, you mean the ground. There's a whisper under the sod that isn't wind. Pooled cold air speaks low and slow. Night frost, Helena says. Sneaky. She looks at the sky the way a cat looks at a shelf. Clear tonight, she adds. We'll smoke. Smoking frost is village theater and science. At dusk, after Rogation bread and small beer, men drag piles of damp brush and raw dung near the young beans and barley corners that lie in the cold hollows. You light each heap until it smolders, not flame, smoke. The village looks like a besieged town in a bad dream, vapors hanging, drifting, cloaking the beans and wheat in a shawl against the drop. The smell is what it is, pungent, necessary, like medicine on a wound. Children pinch noses, and still help. Elfwin's voice makes sure of it. Hearth smoke saved you all winter, she says. Let field smoke do the same. You walk with Raynor along the lowest edge, the whistle ready, the stave switching idly, listening to air as if it had language, and it does. Cold slides off, the higher pasture around the ash. Smoke curls to meet it like an old friend. You check each heap, poke sluggish ones, soothe greedy ones that catch flame. Easy, you murmur to fire like you would to oxen. Fire behaves when spoken to. That's a secret no one writes down. Near midnight, at the far end by the old willow that split in Martin's father's time, you hear a sound that doesn't belong. A thin, ragged cough in the clear between smokes. Edric. He's with the boys. Roe keeping watch at the far heap, bundled in a cloak too big, eyes too bright. He was fine at dusk. He's not now. Hunger's last bite takes many shapes. Chill that sneaks under ribs. Cough that finds a chest that gave too much to winter. Home, you say, and he shakes his head like a man with a job. Smoke, he says. We promised. Promises are rope, and ropes can choke. We keep it, you say, and we keep you. You take his place at the heap and send him with Martin, who appears as if called by a line your mouth didn't speak, to Elfwin and Ida, who already have a pot on the low hearth in your house because Ida always knows which house has what at which hour. Thyme, onion, a scrap of lard, ale, steam that smells like intent. Edric sleeps toward dawn with hot stone at his feet and the cough behind him. The heap keeps smoldering because you fed it when he would have fed it. Keeps and keeps. At first light, the frost sits silver on your fence, but not on the beans. The barley leaves look glossy instead of dead. The village moves like a creature that took a knife and didn't bleed to death. The children run hands along, the smoke smell and grin. Father Edwin blesses the fields again without being asked. The reeve claims he ordered the smoking. Nobody argues. You wipe soot from your face and blow the whistle once more, this time because it feels good. The day after the last of the pit grain is gone, Elfwin ties the empty sack's throat with a knot that says, later, not never. Bread still appears because guilds sent their measure and because bark bread taught hands to believe in thin. Nettle beer bubbles in 3 crocks behind. The bread chest, a spring luxury that cleans thirst out of mouths without stealing minds. Mab watches it with awe, and once with a finger, earning a gentle slap and a lesson in patience. Good things, Elfwin says. Take a while. Mab has heard that lesson all winter dressed in other clothes. A roof needs mending 2 lanes over at Walter Cooper's. Winter soaked his thatch, a storm clawed it away. He's on the causeway crew, and you all know what happens to a man who works for all and loses his roof in the doing. He falls into the cracks the village pretends it doesn't have. So you go in a knot of 5 with ladders and spars and bundles of rye straw, and you lay a new coat on his rafters in half a day. Walter wants to pay in future barrels. Osric refuses and asks for something rarer. Teach Thomas to set a spar. That won't twist, he says, not looking at you when he says it. Walter grins. Gladly. I hate fishing thatch out of the stew. The wolves come one more night, a scouting pair that pads the ditch line like tacksmen hoping you forgot. They sniff dung smoke and bean leaf bitter and human sweat that smells like staying. They leave without ceremony. Summer is for deer that don't count, lambs that run like fools, chickens that attempt sleep in the hedge instead of their creel. Wolves have a better menu. Your hedge watches them go and sighs. You stow the fire pots where you can reach them without looking. Rogation ends with a small procession through the fields. Children carry fennel and cross sticks tied with ribbon the color of old sky. Father Edwin blesses the river in words he wishes worked on other problems. Helena tosses a pinch of salt into the culvert and tells it to keep its throat clear. Men nod at each other in that way that makes a plan if repeated for enough years. Elder Harold, face paler than it was in autumn, sits on the root of the ash at the field corner and gives names to the boys who ask who planted what when. This furrow, he says, tapping, ran crooked the year the king's men came, and we were watching them, not the blade. The boys lean like cattle at a gate. Stories hold fields in place when plows are elsewhere. That night, at the watch, the house breathes a different way. Not the shallow, careful breath of January. Not, yet the lazy summer breath that takes liberties. A deep, honest breath that fills chest and stays there a moment before it leaves. Osric counts the debt to the Lord on his fingers. Brush paid, stone laid, days on hay to come. Elfwin counts fleece. The ewes are ragged with winter and will give reluctantly, but they will give. Grandam Tilda counts the names of the dead without losing herself. She stopped doing that in the storm week and only returned to it after the burial thaw. Mab counts eggs and gets the number wrong on purpose, twice to make you all look at her and laugh. Ida sleeps in her own bed again, Edric's cough gone to sulk in the corners of houses where no one watches smoke and broth at midnight. The pit holds dust. The fields hold promise. Both are honest. Before second sleep, you step outside with Rainer's whistle around your neck and the new habit of looking up without flinching. The stars don't bite. The air is like a clean cloth. Somewhere beyond the hedge, a frog tells an unrepeatable joke. Somewhere in town, a man sings off key in the lane and another answers. Summer rehearses itself badly and you clap anyway. Tomorrow, the guild's carter comes and shows Elfwin's girls how to mend tooth gaps and tease wool without leaving half of it on the comb. Tomorrow, Oswin will walk the causeway with you and tell you which brush bundles have settled and which will settle someone else if you don't add a stone. Tomorrow, Father Edwin will try to teach the boys how the psalm scans and settle for them knowing where the oak lives. Tomorrow, the reeve will find a way to find someone and be ignored politely by a village that learned this winter exactly how much of his power was habit. Tonight, you taste smoke in your mouth and call it sweet. Closing the winter ledger if you've Ever kept a list through hard months and then drawn a line under it with a hand that didn't shake? You already know how a medieval winter ends. It ends without trumpets. It ends with the dull thud of shears closing on the first fleece and the whisper of it coming free. It ends with a loaf that is mostly grain from this week and not last autumn, set down in the middle of the board as if it had arrived through. Skill alone and not luck and mercy and brush bundles sunk in mud. It ends because work did not. The day of shearing comes smelling of lanolin and soil. The ewes stand with offended dignity, their winter coats matted with weather. Osric sharpens the long blades on a stone he favors for this only. He doesn't. Sharpen knives on it. Won't dull it with vegetable cutting. Tools have pride if you let them. The guild's carter, true to promise, has returned with fingers that know more about wool than some men know about their wives. He shows Elfwin's girls how to tease without tearing, how to feed the comb and draw the sliver with a hand quick as birds. Mab tries, tongue stuck out, and finds the rhythm that unknots in more than one meaning. Good hands, Elfwin says. Too low for anyone but you and God to hear. Lord Cuthbert does not return this day, thank all, but his name passes through the yard when Osric tallies the grain you owe by brush and stone. We'll carry 2 sacks to the manor, he says, and no one bristles because it's not the same as last year. Those sacks have a causeway in them and a footbridge brace and a moment when a horse did not drown. Dead is easier when it has a shape. The burial mounds by the church have settled, soft as bread dough under cloth. Snowdrops have gone to seed, lamb's ear leaves have risen to catch small fingers. Father Edwin keeps the good bell out, where it can ring true without ceremony. He rings it once at noon on a day when nothing special happens, and men grin like fools because that sound used to mean only death, and now means lunch. Elder Harold has grown quieter, and so the village speaks more around him. Berengar with the bay, Staff and the memory, Helena with the chalk and the salt, Rainer with the whistle you wear now. On days he counts barley heads, and you walk the culverts. When you blow it to clear boys from a ditch mouth they thought was a seat. They move without, sulk. You have become a voice they don't argue with while they argue everything else. Osric watches you lead 3 men to lift a log out of a channel with a rope you knotted right the first time and doesn't say, "That used to be my rope." He says, "Dinner," and folds you into a meal without making speeches. His quiet is a title you will never write. Edric returns with his father to help comb and to learn the long draw of the spindle that Mab practices now until her wrists ache. He brings a story about Wolfham's ditchers falling into their own work because nobody taught them to lay brush under muck. "We'll show them," you say, and Oswin nods, because he will always be a man who came from somewhere worse and found a place to stay by teaching, which is another word for paying rent. Rogation bruises on boys' shoulders have gone to yellow and then to memory. The boundary oak holds the chalk from Helena's hand like an old note in a book. Once a week, she sends you to walk the lower culvert run and time the water with your lips, counting heartbeats between half-submerged stick and downstream snag. She doesn't ask for numbers. She asks for words. "Idle," you say, sulky, quick, honest. She nods and says, "Now say them before it moves." Slowly a man emerges in the mirror of water when you lean over, patient, curious, less afraid to call things by their names. The wolves don't come. Foxes do, the honest thieves. Chickens die badly in the hedge twice, and then not at all because you relearn the habit of checking gates at dusk, even when the sky golds you. Not everything that hurts in winter is a villain. Not everything that helps in spring is a friend. The world keeps its logic. You learn yours. The house changes. The sleeping platform where 6 bodies thawed into each other in January loosens. People drift in the night without tying knots around each other's ankles under covers, and they do not wake shivering. Elfwin banks the fire later. Osric allows himself 2 sticks where one would have done in February and doesn't feel decadent. The warming stones live on the shelf with a bloom of soot and respect. Grandam Tilda strokes hers like a cat some nights and says to it, "We'll need you again." And it doesn't answer because it doesn't have to. Everyone knows. On Sunday after Ascension, Father Edwin preaches about the body becoming light. And then he becomes practical and announces that the stones for the footbridge brace will come down on Tuesday, and men should be ready to lay them between sext and nonce. He has learned to put calendar into sermon. Men have learned to bring rope to church. After, he stands by the door and asks Mab what her comb has made. She shows him a small skein, twisted fat as her thumb, and he blesses it with 2 fingers like. A joke that wasn't entirely one. The village eats a closing winter meal on a Sunday without a saint's name. Not a feast. A correction. A bowl set heavier. A loaf sliced thicker. A pot with greens, and a bit of salt meat, not because someone died, but because no one did last week. Harold raises the staff and breath shallow and says, "Write the names of the dead on your door in your head, then open it and go through." It is the longest sentence he has said since Candlemas. People hold still while it lands. You carry the sacks owed along the causeway with Osric and Martin and Watt and 2 boys from Wolfham because you insist. The reeve weighs and sniffs and weighs again. The steward counts on wax. A man in the manor. Kitchen takes what's yours and gives a tally stick back. It is not the same as last year. No one grovels. No one grins. Accounts are settled. The bridge braces arrive on a wain behind you, ledge rock sweating with spring. You throw your shoulder, your hands, your knots against them in the afternoon, Helena marking where each should kiss current against wood. The first stone drops into place with a sound that feels like your chest when a cough ends for good. Toward dusk, the men who still have music make it, and the women who still remember. Dances remember them with feet that are finally not just for walking. Mab jumps all the way over a small fire because some idiot told her that's what big girls do, and Elfwin holds her breath until the landing, and then exhales slowly because that's what mothers do. You lean against a post with Raynor and Oswin, and watch summer threaten to arrive. Raynor says, "You owe me 2 whistles now." You hold up the one on your neck. He taps it. "This," he says, "and your mouth." That night, in the watch that isn't quite necessary anymore but would feel wrong if you skipped it, you sit with Elfwin and Osric at the table that has counted more than food. Osric draws a new rectangle on the board with the coal, an extra room if the barley decides to be generous and the guild pays on time and the Lord doesn't invent a tax for being alive. "Door here," he says, pointing, "facing east. It'll see sun in winter when sun is stingy." Elfwin nods. "And a shelf for the stones," she says. They earned a quiet place. Grandam Tilda speaks from her corner with her eyes shut. "Make the threshold tall enough you have to notice it," she says. "So you remember where you are when you go in and when you come out." She is not talking only about doors. You sleep one long sleep that night, first and second together, and wake confused, not because you were cold, but because you weren't obliged to be awake in the middle. Your body learns quickly. It will unlearn. Quickly again in November. That is the rhythm, and everyone knows it. Between now and then there will be hay, and storms that apologize for their own strength, and blight if God is inattentive, and births, and a week when fish leap like fools in the weir, and children smell like river and bark less like bread and more like boats, and the guild's cart, and the shepherds swear, and the reeves fine, and Raynor's shout, and Helena's chalk, and Father Edwin's Latin turning the same blessing different directions until it splashes every necessary thing. The winter ledger closes, not with a clap, with a careful stroke. The line under the names of the dead is straight. The line under the grain is honest. The line under the causeway is double, because you built it and walked it and didn't drown on it. The line under your name is not there. Names don't get lines in living ledgers. They get knots, whistles, the habit of looking at water and hearing what it intends before it decides. If you're listening in a warm bed centuries away, your breath slow and your roof tight, you are part of that ledger. People whose hands smelled, like wool and smoke and river built the column you stand in. They argued with beasts and weather and each other, and wrote the argument down in furrows and brush bundles, and the way a bowl is passed left, not right, because left puts it in the good hand of the person who hasn't eaten yet. Their math kept you. Their rope held a horse you didn't ride. Their smoke saved a bean you didn't plant. Their watch taught your bones a rhythm you still follow when you wake at midnight and don't know why. You know why. Somewhere a culvert needs clearing. Somewhere a hedge watches eyes. Somewhere a child coughs and someone lights a smolder heap, and someone else stirs onion and thyme with a clean spoon, and the warming stone goes under a blanket that holds 2, then 3, then 6, and a village that refused to die this winter loosens its shoulders and says the smallest word, the bravest one, the one that costs almost nothing and buys almost everything. Enough. And then, because they are clever, because they learned it from winters, they add one more. Tomorrow. Cuthbert does a quick calculation, not on wax but on weather and rumor, and the number of men he will need in April whose hands do not tremble. He clears his throat. We will advance grain, he says, and the frost in the air changes shape. Men don't smile. They don't waste. But eyes lift like doors letting in a hand's breadth of sun. Not gifts, the Lord adds, because he is a Lord and has to say it. Loans against summer, paid back in ditch work and causeway building. That North Meadow has drowned twice in 10 years. I want a raised road from the ford to the manor gate, pack it with brush and stone. Drainage ditches either side cut to the brook. Steward, record names. Father, witness. The reeve makes a noise like a man who stood up and hit his head on the beam he forgot. Father Edwin bows a bow that touches theology and politics both. Rayner's face doesn't change, because he understands that loans are rope-tied at both ends. But Osric nods slow. Work is meat you can chew. A causeway is a thing that wears your footprints for 50 years. He will not say no. Helena lifts her chin. And deadfall rights? She asks. The South Wood will be safer cut. Let's call it stewardship for the sake of your account books. Cuthbert's eyebrow does that aristocratic reaching for his forehead dance. He could slap her down. He could trade his grudging respect for offense and you would swallow the loss. He sighs instead, long enough to fog his horse's ears. 3 days in the South Wood, he says. Take only what fell and leave the coppice. He turns to the reeve. Make sure the measure is fair, not your version of it. The men-at-arms cough again. And Hazel, Alfwin says before wisdom can lay a hand on her mouth. For hurdles. Ours are tired. This is not a woman's day to be quiet. It is no one's. Cuthbert looks at her with an expression you cannot read. Hazel, he says, a stand on the lower bank. 1 man to mark the cut. If I hear of stripping, I'll strip the back of the man I hear it of. He glances at Osric. Pick the marker. Pick the cutters who know what coppice means. Osric's nod is a weight on the scale everyone in the village feels. He will choose men who remember that next year is also a year. The steward's wax tablet is a flock of scratches now, names and days and measures. He wraps it with his stylus like a magistrate itching to adjourn. Seed is not to be touched, he says again, because he is the sort of man who says the easy thing 3 times and thinks he's done the hard one once. Father Edwin smiles at him as if he just invented mercy. We will lock the loft, the priest says, with 2 keys. He lifts one hand. Yours. He lifts the other. Mine. Cuthbert's eyes glint. Priests and lords have an old game. Today the Lord lets the priest feel tall. Show me the bridge, Cuthbert says again, and the procession moves. Lord, steward, priest, reeve, men with spears that will taste mud all afternoon. They cross slow. At the middle, the lord's horse plants to shy at a creeping slate. The footboard groans. For one bright, idiotic instant, the gelding and his lord are both stupid. The horse's foreleg slides off the edge and plunges to the shoulder. Panic eats good sense in creatures high and low. Osric doesn't think, his hands do. The rope you tied for the morning watch sits coiled by the post as Raynor's habit wills it to. Osric loops it around the gelding's chest in a blink. You and Watt drop to your bellies and belly crawl like boys saving a dare. Men-at-arms flail, with spear butts in water, and accomplish nothing for 3 heartbeats. "Hold!" Osric barks, the same word he threw into the world for a drowning weaver 2 mornings ago, and men obey as if the syllable were an anointed thing. On the 4th heartbeat, the horse finds purchase on the brace the miller's boy hammered in yesterday, lunges and lands whole on the board with a shudder that shakes the lord from hat to spur. Silence, not reverent, calculating. A lord measuring. How much face he lost and how much grain he owes to get it back. Cuthbert looks at Osric and then at you. He opens his mouth, closes it, opens it again. "You tie good knots," he says at last. "And it is as rich as if he'd pinned a brooch to your mother's shawl. If my stablemaster dies of stupidity, I'll send for you." The reeve looks like a man who swallowed a bone. Father Edwin's mouth twitches in a way that might be a prayer or a laugh. By afternoon, the church is a counting house. Men sign with a mark. Father Edwin witnesses. The steward scratches tokens into a board. The village's debt measured in inches of causeway, and days of shoulders. You carry a sack of grain home that night that weighs like privilege and responsibility both. Elfwin sets aside one worn bowl. "For the Lord," she says, "we repay what keeps us from the pit." And just like that, the winter's arithmetic changes columns. You still eat pottage thickened with cattail. You still smell like smoke and fox and old wool. Your fingers still crack where cold has written its commentaries. Wolves still sketch their cursive along the hedge at moonrise. But there is flour enough to bake 1 honest loaf a week and break it at the green, so no one believes their suffering was original. There is deadfall in the lane, and it burns like a rumor dying. There is a pile of hazel poles by the sty, and you can almost hear summer humming in their sap. There is stone scraped from the manor's quarry, and Oswin and the ditchers lay it, alongside brush and old hurdles to lift a road from muck. You're back buying future brisk mornings when carts will cross without killing oxen in the ruts. That night, in the watch, Grandam Tilda nods at the rope by the door and says to no one, "The Lord counts his seed. We count our knots." Elfwin lays a hand over hers. "We count our names," she says, "and keep them." You shift on the sleeping, palate, and feel something you haven't felt since All Souls. It isn't comfort. Winter hates comfort on principle. It is direction. A path across muck that wasn't there yesterday and will be there tomorrow because you traded mud and muscle for it. When second sleep comes, it is the clean, heavy kind, the sort that arrives when a ledger balances, even if the numbers are thin. Outside, the men-at-arms snore in the church porch because the priest claimed the nave for counting, and God likes his jokes simple. A wolf pads the far hedgerow and stops, tipping his head in that thoughtful way you've come to respect. He inhales, smells tallow, fox, men, iron, stone, grain, river, ash, rope, goat, frost, liturgy, and the particular warm animal truth of a village that is not refusing to die. He chooses deer. Bark bread and the day the ground gave back. If you've ever stretched a meal by pretending fullness is a choice, you already know bark bread. The morning they decide to take cambium from the ash trees. The village goes quiet in that particular way that means everyone heard the same thought at the same time, and nobody wants to say it aloud. Bark is last ledger, last drawer, last trick. You don't begin there. You go there when the bowls have more memory than meal. Osric and Helena mark the trees with a thumbprint of charcoal. Never the full ring, never the young ones. Coppice gives, murder takes. You peel only one clean panel per trunk, narrow and tall, so the tree can still drink and speak. You slide your knife between armor and living, outer bark and inner, until the cambium lifts like a pale tongue. It smells faintly green even now, a ghost of spring hidden inside winter's coat. Back at the hearth, you slice the panels into ribbons and lay them on a rush mat by the coals until they stiffen and curl. Hugh, your hands, crush those curls with a smooth stone that has polished 100 such necessities into powder. The rhythm is light and cruel, powder and stringy bits. Sieve them again. Sieve again. When the powder looks like something a hungry mind could almost convince a mouth to swallow, Aelfwine mixes it with a thumb of oat and a thought of salt, and pats it flat on the iron to hiss over the hearth. It tastes like honest effort. Your jaw works harder than usual. You don't lie to yourself and call it good. You call it enough. That is a word winter respects. Across 3 days, the bark bread turns up at every hearth, the way news turns up and takes off its shoes. Children learn to chew slow like their elders. Grandam Tilda gnaws, shakes her head, and says, "I have eaten worse and told God thank you." When you ask her what worse tasted like, she says, "Antlers." You do not ask whose. Aelfwine, who has written this winter's liturgy in the margins of her mind, slips a thumb of goose fat across the second day's flatbread for Mab and won't take a bite herself until Osric notices and tears his portion, so the larger half is hers. No speech, just the arithmetic of love. Oswin earns bark bread with the ditchers and adds a trick to Helena's work, laying bundles of brashwood in the ditch bottoms before backfilling with mud, so spring water will hurry rather than sulk. "Water is lazy," he says. "Give it a bed that rolls it along." He sleeps in the church porch still, not quite villager, not quite stranger. Everyone understands borders. Hunger smudges them, winter redraws them. Then there is a sound nobody hears until everyone does. At first, a sticky pulling sound like a boot leaving mud, then a slow thud, then 100 small sighs. The south-facing verge of the churchyard has let go. Not all, not deep, but enough. "Ground gave," Rayner says, standing from his stool. He doesn't shout the word. He doesn't have to. It runs through the village like warmth poured from a bucket. The dead can be returned to the earth. Father Edwin rings the cracked bell, not the clean one. The cracked one is for complicated mercies.